California, but even though I don't have a freezing winter here and I can grow all year, a lot of these tips will still apply to your growing zone as long as you're taking into account that you need to harvest before your freeze and plant after your freeze if you want to avoid your plants dying from the cold. There are some plants that can survive this, but we're not going to be talking about that today because we're in like a subtropical zone. It stays warm throughout the winter and we have to do a few things a little bit differently. So I'm just going to zoom through a little bit of tips and tricks on what I've learned from winter growing and how you can be successful. And if you have a similar zone, you can go ahead and apply all of this right now. And if not, wait till it stops freezing, and then you can apply these tips and tricks as well so that you can have an bountiful spring and fall harvest. All right, so here we go. So first of all, garlic. You got to plant your garlic in the winter, and a lot of people say plant it in October, but it's a little bit different here. So because we have a warmer winter, we still are having temperatures in the 70s up into December, and it doesn't really get cold until January and February, where it doesn't freeze, but it does cool off. And so the garlic will think that it's spring if you plant it as early as October. It's going to start sprouting, then it's going to get cold in February. It's going to stunt that garlic, and you're not going to have big, healthy bulbs like you would have if you would have waited to plant it until end of November or in December. So plant your garlics now. Okay, everybody, if you are in zone 10, you can still plant your garlics. If you're in a place that has a warm winter, now is actually the time to plant your garlics. It's not too late. A lot of beginner gardeners will actually try to plant garlic in spring because they just assume that that's what's supposed to be done. But what ends up happening is their garlics don't develop as fully. It really wants to be in the ground, developing a root system during the colder months so that it can bulb out when the spring comes along and it really starts growing a lot of leaf mass. Okay, garlic. What's another common winter thing is brassicas. Brassicas are going to include your broccoli, your cauliflower, your kale, your collards, Mizuna lettuce, your mustards. There's so many things. Bok choy, cabbage in the brassica family. And so what you're going to have to remember, let's start with just like the big heading brassicas. That's going to be your cabbage, your cauliflower, your broccoli. These plants, the most important thing to remember is that they are going to want some fertility in the soil in regards to a little bit of phosphorus for nice head development and some nitrogen for healthy leaf development. They aren't incredibly thirsty for these nutrients, but they are thirsty for water. So you're going to make sure that these things don't wilt, because if your plants stunt, any of your winter plants, they're vegetables for the most part. So you're trying to keep them from bolting, it would be the word, going to seed early. Like if you've ever planted a cilantro and it just flowered right away and you didn't get a lot of leaves off of it and you're like, man, that was a bummer. Or you planted broccoli and you only got a little tiny head. It could have been because it was the wrong season. And it also could have been because that plant was stressed out. So you want to make sure that you have nice loamy soil so that your plants can root out into it. And these brassicas with the big heads, they will take a little bit longer. You're going to want to make sure that they have enough space for their leaves to fully open up, which could be like 2 square feet, maybe even a little bit more, depending on what variety you're growing. Maybe a little bit less if you're growing like a broccolini or a smaller variety. All right. So you're going to make sure that these have space because their big leaves are going to be what provides a lot of the energy for that veg to develop that you're trying to eat. Veg is when you're eating the roots or the leaves, the stems, the veg, and fruits when you're eating the fruit. It's really simple. So a lot of the winter stuff, you're eating the roots, you're eating the leaves, because that's what grows better in that cool weather because it's not wilting up all the time. And roots, they like to be usually pretty consistently moist. So the summer months get a little hard. You can grow things in the warmer weather, but some things like beets and carrots, they just really prefer these cooler seasons. So with the brassicas, there's a few others that I really highly recommend. So first of all, if you're having trouble with broccoli and cauliflower, you got to do broccolini. You get a lot more shoots, and so that means that your chances that your all your broccolinis are going to have pest problems are far fewer than your chance that you put all this effort into growing a broccoli plant and then there's bugs on it, or you have some sort of problem because you don't have time to maintain it in the same sort of way. So you could really benefit from growing broccolini. The first little head that comes up is going to be small. Eat that one, and then you're going to get a bunch of side shoots at the same time, to where you might be able to get like a whole side plate worth of broccolini off just one plant for the night. So those are a really effective way to actually get something out of your garden. I've been really liking bok choy as well. Those plants stay pretty tight and they just grow pretty quickly as well. And if you steam the stems so that they soften up before you cook the leaves, add the leaves after the stems are like translucent, it actually gets a really nice texture, soaks up a lot of flavor really well. Another brassica that you don't want to pass up on is Mizuna. Mizuna greens are the little like uh, toothy looking leaves that you see in like a baby salad green mix, and these actually will come up like a little sheet, and you just cut them down, but leave a couple of leaves and they'll come up over and over again. You can get tons of harvest out of Mizuna. It's really delicious, either stir fried or just raw mixed in your salads. And you can get a whole lot off of just one plant. So definitely highly recommend growing some Mizuna. There's lots of other great brassicas, the mustards, the kales. I guess kale, I'll do a quick one on kale. Kale is actually a biennial, meaning it's going to flower out the second year. So if you do have a place where the kale could survive the whole winter, excuse me, you're definitely going to want to plant that kale in the fall or the winter so that you can get a long harvest all year long. Because my kales that I planted last winter are still alive right now. So I have huge leafy kale, but if I don't plant more of them this year, then those are going to flower out next year. And oftentimes after they flower, they don't develop the same kind of leaf pattern that you're familiar with and often are more prone to bugs and other kinds of diseases. So yeah, try the brassica families. They're all really easy to grow. One thing I want to make a note on is that there are different kinds of ways that you could sow seeds. You could single sow, where you just put one seed in. You might do this with something like a squash or like a bean, a pea, because you just know that this plant's going to get pretty big pretty quickly and you don't want it to be fighting and you don't want to have to detangle the roots from other things. Other things you might single sow would be like cilantro or beets because and chard, because these seeds actually contain multitudes. So every little piece of seed that you see is actually multiple seeds. So you're going to want to single sow those ones as well. But for a lot of these other winter things, multi-sowing is an excellent technique that you need to add into your quiver if you're going to be sowing your own seeds. If you're not going to be sowing your own seeds, I guess you could skip forward a minute or two and I'll be back talking about plants. But this is some specific seed starting tips right here. If your seeds are very tiny, like little grains of sand, or even a little bit larger, like lettuce seeds, arugula, things like that, where it's like just little granules, then you could actually, instead of poking a hole and just putting a couple seeds where you might have sparse germination, you can just take like a little cup planter or a little larger cell. Don't fill it up all the way. Sprinkle some seeds on the top and then just add a little bit more soil on top. You're going to have a bunch of seedlings sprouting at the same time in that pot. But when it comes time and they start to gain, like they get past their cotyledon leaves and they start getting a few true leaves, those are the leaves that look like the actual plant, then you can actually prick them apart. And there's lots of great videos on this by Charles Dowding. So I highly recommend checking that out if you want to actually see some of the pricking apart method. And I do have some short videos on that on my page if you want to check those out. But it's a really excellent technique for lettuce. I really love doing this for lettuce. I'll just have a cup, like a little cup planter, put soil, put the seeds, let them get a few true leaves, and then I'll pull it out and separate the roots, and I can get lots of individual great lettuce plants this way. You could select the best plants out of the bunch. And another thing about multi-sowing is that sometimes you get like runts and you get weird seedlings. So if you plant 10 seeds, your chances of getting a healthy one are more likely than if you only plant 3 seeds. A lot of these packs come with hundreds of seeds, and the seeds are losing viability every year. So why not just plant more seeds and make sure that you have a really healthy plant for your garden? If you have an extra one, you might be able to put it somewhere else and let it go to seed and collect your own seed for yourself next year. So the larger the seed gets, the less of them that you want to plant per cell or per planting area. Larger seeds are more easy to direct sow, or sometimes small seeds are as well, but you want to multi-sow them and then thin them out later. Also, sometimes it's really easy to forget that people are like, oh, I don't want to have to thin stuff out. So for carrots, that's annoying. You want to plant those ones sparsely and direct sow carrots, and you want to make sure that you don't have to go in and thin them out too much. But for things like dill, I mean, one dill plant can give you like a whole Ziploc bag full of dill seeds. And then what are you going to do with all those? Waste them? No, just sow that dill really thick. And then when you want to go harvest them, just take the whole plant. And then you're thinning it out, but you're also getting a harvest out of it. So you're not just doing work for nothing. You feel me? All right, so smaller seeds, multi-sow them, bigger seeds, single sow them, medium-sized seeds. This is where I like to take like, if you have those little 6-cell planters, I'll poke 2 holes in them and I'll put a couple seeds in each hole. Then when they come up, I'll separate those clumps out. And if they come apart pretty easily, I might separate them more. And if not, I might leave them together just and pick out the one that's really thriving and eliminate the other ones. And doing it this way, I've had a lot better success with my seedlings. I've been opining on this for a while. I think I'm getting off topic of the video. Let's get back actually to the vegetables. So we talked garlic, we talked brassicas, The other thing you can do is a lot of your root vegetables. I taught carrots. You're going to want to direct sow carrots, and the most important thing for those, don't sow them too deeply because they are small little seedlings. And then you have to make sure that those carrot seedlings don't dry out at all over the next 2 weeks, because if they dry out, they will die. They are very sensitive. You have to keep them moist. There's a lot of different techniques where people will cover the carrots. Some people will use like a piece of wood. Some people will use other things. Anything you do to cover those carrot seedlings to keep them moist after you sow them, and take that off about a week or two later once the sprouts start emerging so that they can get some sunlight and actually start growing and hardening off on their own. So other root crops are going to be your beets and your radishes. Radishes are the quickest thing. There are a lot of varieties of radishes that after you sow the seeds, you can be eating the radish in like a month or 40 days. So if you want something really quick, that's not going to take up too much space, there's a lot of little radishes that are great for the winter. Some of the larger radish varieties are actually more of like spring and summer ones. So don't maybe focus on a daikon at this time, but focus more on like the little French market radishes. Those are really yummy. And the cherry bell is another variety that I really like. So moving on with the beets, I like to either direct sow those or I'll start them in cells and transplant them out, but I'll do little cells with, again, just one seed per cell. You can let your beets stay in clusters and still get a really nice harvest. So you don't need to separate out like each individual seed when it, excuse me, let me rephrase this. Since the beet seeds contain multitudes and have multiple plants per seed, if you plant one seed per cell, you're not going to have to thin those out further. You can let like 2 or 3 beets grow next to each other and still get a really delicious, nice sized beet. Or if you want to get larger beets, you can just pick the smaller ones out once they get like, like this big, and then wait for the other one to get like, be like a nice honker, So all of that root stuff, you just got to make sure it stays evenly moist, and it's going to do well for you in the winter. So other things that grow really well in the winter right now are sugar snap peas. I am finding out, I thought sugar snap peas was really only like a spring thing, but I'm finding out that it grows excellent during the winter here. So I should be having sugar snap peas all winter long. I've been selling people plants. They are thriving. Everyone's loving their sugar snap peas right now. Another thing that you got to be growing for the winter is lettuce. Now, it's really hard to grow lettuce during the summer because it's always trying to wilt and there's so many bugs. But during the winter, it's a lot cooler. There's less pest pressure, and you can grow all sorts of different varieties of lettuce, from the more crunchy ones to the more tender ones, the purple ones, the green ones. Some of my favorite varieties are Little Gem, if you want those little heart romaine ones that are just super good for making salads. And I also really like the Butter Crunch head lettuce. Those are so beautiful. Actually, in my profile picture, I think I'm holding one of those. So yeah, loves me some lettuce. Grow a few different kinds. And again, make sure that you have a single plant that has enough space to grow into its full size lettuce, because if you plant your lettuces too closely and their leaves are growing all on top of each other, that's going to invite all sorts of different problems for your lettuce. All right, so keep your lettuces moist. If you can, keep them in the shade when they're babies so that they can harden off. If it's sunnier out and if it's more overcast, you can put them out more easily. Just keep those moist until they harden off, and really love those. Once it gets warmer, there is a variety of lettuce I can grow pretty much all summer here called Jericho, but in the winter, I throw that one out and I go for all the really nice tender ones that I can only do all winter. Loves me some good lettuce. Also, green onions. Now, you got to have sun to get a nice bulbing onion, but you can have green onions all winter long here. So to get my onion fix, I'll be growing green onions all winter long. And all of your herbs, a lot of people will think of like things like cilantro as going with summer dishes, and things like basil as going with summer dishes. And you can grow basil during the summer here. Cilantro struggles. But in the winter, they actually truly thrive. I'll have huge cilantro plants that I get so many giant healthy leaves off of that it's really worth my while. Same with the basils. I'll just get them over and over and over again. Now, it's important when you're harvesting your herbs that you harvest them in the correct way if you want to get your maximum harvest out of them. So for something like cilantro, you can either grab the top and cut it like the Mizuna, but don't cut the leaves at the bottom. You can get a few cuts out of it that way, or you can take a few leaves at a time from the outside. Same with your lettuces. Some lettuces, if you just cut them, they'll come back and you'll get another head out of it, and you can do a few cuts that way, or you can just take one leaf at a time. And that way you can have a more consistent supply. And when you do one leaf at a time, just slowly pruning them, they actually last longer and you will get a larger harvest overall. But sometimes it's a lot quicker to just grab something and harvest it. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, green onions, herbs, yeah, basil, cilantro, but So for cilantro, I said you pull up from the outside. For basil and other plants like in the mint family like that, you'll notice that where they have a stem growing, there's like two more stems. Let's say this, my middle finger is the lead stem. Then these are two more stems coming out with flowers. So if you cut this one, it'll bush out into these other two branches. So when you're actually going for your basil, you don't want to take the leaves from the bottom because that'll just strip your plant and make it really leggy and tall, and you'll just have a couple branches and it'll actually flower and you won't really be able to get a lot of harvest out of it. But if you pinch it from the top when you harvest it or cut it from the top, then cut down to one of those nodes where it branches out, and your basil plant will get more bushy, and you'll be cutting the flowers off when you do this. So it'll keep it from flowering and keep it in a vegetative state so that you can get more and more pesto out of your basil or whatever you do with it for that matter. Now, I am starting a few other seeds during the winter, um, as far as just letting whatever was volunteering. I've been pricking that out and paying a little bit more attention to that. And I'm going to make another video where I go into the flowers. But off the top of my head, that's most of the things that I can think about. Um, I think I'm missing a few things. I'm not going to start my potatoes until it warms up a little bit. They like the temps to be like over 65 degrees to really get the nice growth. Although I still do have some potatoes. I'm just not starting my main crop of potatoes. There are a lot of plants that will keep growing all winter here that are summer plants like peppers and tomatoes, but oftentimes it's not worth the effort of keeping them alive, and you raise the potential to harbor diseases in your garden that will affect those plants during the next cycle. So I really do like to focus just on growing winter stuff. It doesn't last all too long, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, you're back to doing your peppers, your tomatoes, eggplants, and all that fun stuff that just feels more like what you imagine a farm to be. But there's so much delicious stuff to be eating all winter long. So don't miss out. Plant something in your garden right when it's done freezing and see all the bounty that you can have. Or if it doesn't freeze where you're at, plant it right now. So, at the risk of losing my train of thought, I'll end this here. Happy planting, and thanks for talking dirt with me.